absolutely despise third-party lenses. As a professional photographer, I'd rather have the peace of mind knowing that a lens was specifically designed for the camera system that I'm using, even if it means paying a few extra bucks. And then this lens came along and it completely changed my perspective on things. The Viltrox 13mm f1.4 is truly a unique lens in the Fujifilm market. Should you add this lens to your kit? Well, that's really up to you, but for me, here are 3 reasons why it's earned a place in my photography kit. Back when I was shooting Nikon full frame, the 20mm 1.8G was my go-to ultra-wide lens. Something about the ultra-wide perspective plus a large aperture gives extreme subject isolation, really making things larger than life, and this combination allowed me to shoot events, low light, night scenes, and really daytime shots all with one lens. Moving over to Fujifilm, a lens like this didn't really exist. I tried the 14mm 2.8 and I really didn't like the 2.8 aperture. I also tried the 10-24 f4 and then I eventually sold that one, and then I landed on the Rokinon 12mm f2 and it worked alright, but I always missed the functionality of autofocus. Then after that I moved back to the 10-24 f4 when they released the WR version. Now enter the 13mm 1.4 from Viltrox. It pretty much checks all the boxes. It's got 20mm full frame equivalent, a large 1.4 aperture, and autofocus. Like, autofocus for photography is kind of key for me to even consider using a lens at an event or a wedding. And now that I have the 18mm 1.4 with this new Viltrox 13mm 1.4, I'm really wondering why I still have the Fujifilm 16mm 1.4 in my kit, as truthfully, it's collecting a lot of dust now. Video content creation is a big part of my work. While it's not a factor for wedding photography and portrait photography, it is a big factor for YouTube videos like this one. If you've been following my YouTube channel, you've actually already seen real-world footage from this Viltrox 13mm 1.4 for video. I've been using it as my main vlogging lens, and for those scenes where I want something a little bit more casual for my talking head sequences. It allows me to get close to the camera and also still allow you to see kind of like the real feel of the environment that I'm in. I should also note that the transition from like close autofocus to my face is as smooth as it needs to be, and the autofocus is quieter than the 16mm 1.4, which used to be my previous go-to ultra-wide lens for video. The last reason for me is really the price. So full transparency, Viltrox did send this lens over to me free of charge in exchange for making this review for you all, but they didn't ask me to say anything specific about the lens, or they didn't get to review this video beforehand. But dang, $429 US for an ultra-wide prime, large aperture, smooth autofocus for video. This really is truly a unique Fujifilm lens in this market. And while I am not a pixel peeper, the quality of this lens is sharp enough. I mainly compose frames in the center when I'm shooting ultra-wide lenses, so really I'm working within the strengths of this lens anyways, and when I do need a full scene captured with the corners sharp, stopping down to f4 is not really a problem for me. And then you gotta add some nice metal build quality with an included metal lens hood. Seriously, everyone needs to be taking notes about what Viltrox did for this specific release. While I will honestly admit that I might not have purchased this lens because my first party lens kind of like snobbery, I'm glad I was given the opportunity to review it, as it really is a complete joy to use, and I would say my favorite third-party lens that I've ever tried to date. With that said, this lens is not flawless. The main thing that I've noticed about this lens, specifically with video footage, is it's very like wobbly in the corners, shaky, kind of jello-y footage. I'm not sure if this is because of the lens by itself or the lens in combination with the IBIS of the XS10, but it does kind of like reduce the utility of my ideal vlogging experience. But really, I'm willing to live with it, or at least be more careful moving forward for other vlogging videos. Now let's do some comparison with other lenses in this Fujifilm lineup. So first is the 14mm 2.8. My time with the 14mm f2.8 was pretty limited, but because it's still priced at $899 despite being one of the older lenses of the Fujifilm lineup, I think the 1.4 aperture and the silent autofocus of the Viltrox has it pretty much beat. The 10-24 f4 is a stellar lens. It's got great image quality and it's really built really nicely. But truth be told, I tend to use that lens exclusively at 10mm for that ultra wide effect. So for photography, I'm okay with using the f4 when paired with like say the XS10 for static shots with the IBIS, but I've never actually considered using the 10-24 for anything kind of like documentary or moving in a wedding or kind of like event photography environment. On the other hand, the 13mm 1.4 I've actually been able to utilize throughout the wedding day because of that 1.4 aperture. And for video, the 1.4 aperture is really handy, as the f4 of the 10-24 lens is only really good for outdoor vlogs, and it's pretty much hungry for light anytime you step indoors. In comparison to the Rokinon 12mm f2, the Rokinon is cheaper and it's a little bit wider, but for an increase of price you get, again, 1.4 aperture and autofocus, and I think between this two kind of like factors, it's not really a competition. Okay, so the elephant in the room, the 16mm f1.4. If you're choosing between these lenses, it really comes down to price, autofocus, and magnification. The 16mm 1.4 is really unmatched in its close focus ability. That's not a question. But if you're looking for a more smoother and more silent autofocus experience in a more budget-friendly price, the 13mm 1.4 is really a great option if you're okay with the wider field of view of this lens. And I think the final question that everyone has on their minds is, Reggie, what about astrophotography? How does it do? Well, honestly, I'm a wedding photographer, so why would you even trust my judgment or conclusion about astrophotography when I don't even have any clue about that genre? I definitely am not the best person or best resource to make that conclusion, so definitely check out another video or another article for that type of answer. And with that, my name is Reggie Ballesteros. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you loved it, please consider subscribing for more Fujifilm or photography content whenever I feel like making a new video. If you can't wait for that long, please be sure to follow me on Instagram at ReggieBPhoto, as I'm always posting new tips, tricks, and tutorials every single day. And for those who made it to the end of the video, which lens should I review next? The 13mm 1.4 or the 50mm 1.0? Vote down in the comments.